And once again, a nice good evening to everyone. It's about 10 o'clock Eastern Time on January 30th, 2024. My name again is Andrew Sindler, and I want to first wish you a, very belated Happy New Year. This is my first video for the YouTube channel of the new year, 2024. And I apologize, I've been lagging a little bit. It was a little bit of a rough start to the new year for me. I was out the final 2 weeks of last year with holidays and New Year. And then I developed a bad upper respiratory infection that had me out the first couple of weeks of the new year as well. So it's about 4 weeks worth of backed up work, phone calls, emails, you name it. Still trying to catch up as we speak, but I definitely didn't want to let it go much longer without getting this video done. So I have a really, really important topic to cover here tonight. Um, this is something that not only comes up regularly, and I've done several of these preps, so to speak, recently for my own clients, but it is such a vital part of claims in the early on stages of a claim that it's really, really important to know what this is and how it works. So without further ado, I'm going to get my PowerPoint going and share that with you. So if you're visual like me, you'll be able to follow along, no problem. But this is, again, a very important and relevant topic. And if you have any pending claims and you're watching this, you may have already been through this, or you might be going through it soon. So it's definitely important to note it. And if you've already been through it, you might go through it again as your claim progresses, especially if you get denied and you have to go forward. So let me pull up the PowerPoint first, and I'm going to share that part of my screen with you. Sorry for the brightness going back and forth a little bit. Okay, here we go. All right. So let me get the slideshow going. All right. So tonight's Social Security disability topic is how to prepare for your consultative examination, or CE for short. So we're going to spend some time discussing how this works and exactly what it is for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, and we'll go from there. I apologize in advance for this particular PowerPoint. I got a little, I guess you could say, trigger happy and just started to have some fun with the different types of animation. So some of it might come in and be a little dizzying, but once it hits the screen, it'll be stationary. Again, just as a reminder for those of you who are new to this YouTube channel, here's my information. That's my website, my phone number and email. Best two ways to reach me, and that is my cell phone, so I can be texted on it as well. Again, I'm based in Maryland, but I practice all over the country. Again, that's my background of how long I've been practicing and how long specifically solely in this area. And again, just thoroughly enjoy helping people, especially with this type of practice area and these claims, and I'm always glad to be able to do it. Okay, let's get into the topic. Consultative examinations, what are they? So CEs, as we call them for short in this world, are one-time medical exams that are requested by Social Security as part of the claims process. So usually they, well, actually, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. My bullet points are about to say what I'm about to say, so let me get those up first. Okay, so consultative examinations usually occur at the initial or the reconsideration stages. So the initial claim, and then if you get denied and you file the first appeal at reconsideration, as we've talked about in prior videos, that's generally when they occur, sometime as the case is being developed and it's assigned to a caseworker. They can also occur at the hearing stage, either before or after a hearing has taken place, if an ALJ, a judge, requests them. They're not that common at that stage, but it's not impossible. So it really depends. But the bulk of them occur at these two stages. Now, these are not exams for the purpose of treatment. This is not like when you go see your own doctor just to get checked up or treat something that's going on, or deal with a flare-up of an existing problem that you're getting regular treatment for. This is a medical visit to gather information and additional findings or opinions on your claim from the examiner that's doing it. Now, Social Security, since they're the ones that request and require this exam, They pay for it, and they may be able to pay for your transportation as well. Apologize for the typo. I'm just noticing in my own PowerPoint. But again, they may be able to pay for. Oh, that's not a typo. I'm sorry. I take that back. It's a late at night, folks. I apologize. But apparently, I need to be able to read, even though it's late at night. So Social Security, again, pays for this exam. They may be able to pay for or provide transportation to the appointment if you're not able to get there easily on your own. So generally speaking, when they do schedule these, they do take note of where you live, and particularly if you have limitations on traveling or getting around, or even if it's an impairment that makes it difficult to leave your home. On rare occasions, they actually can do these as a telehealth appointment. They were doing it that way primarily through the pandemic. That's really not the norm anymore. I'm not going to talk about it as if that's the way they'll do it, but if that is something that is concerning to you, then that is something you can raise when they do schedule it. But again, this is all on Social Security. They're the ones that request it, so they're the ones that are going to pay for it, all around. So why do them? And you'll notice a little theme I have going is you're going to see all the question words eventually as I go through each slide. So generally, there's two reasons why Social Security would request a CE, but there's really only one that Social Security would likely have you believe. But I'm going to tell you about both of them. So let's start with what I call the official one. If there isn't sufficient enough medical evidence from your treating medical providers, they may ask to do a CE. And this may be true, especially if you do have limited ability to seek treatment due to financial issues, lack of insurance, lack of money to pay out of pocket, or if you can't get a referral to a certain type of specialist. I'm going to talk a little bit in a coming slide about that a little more. Sometimes you can actually be sent to the type of specialist you actually need to see just to get evaluated. Not always. Sometimes they will only send you to kind of a generic type of provider, even though they're qualified to do it. They're not really focused on what your problem is. So if that's the reason behind it, sometimes that can actually be a good thing, which we'll talk about as we go forward. But that's what they would always kind of have you believe as the reason why. Now let's talk about the unofficial reason. The unofficial reason is that if they request a CE, despite you having sufficient medical evidence from your treating providers, they're seeking a, quote, second opinion. And why? Because they don't believe your treating providers, or they want to get some support to deny your claim. So if you have abundant amounts of medical evidence from your treating providers, and that pretty much all points, like all signs point to disability, sometimes you might ask yourself, well, then why do I have to see their doctor too? Now, sometimes it's legitimately just to make sure that an independent doctor is going to agree with the treating doctor, because the treating doctor could tend to be a little biased, especially if they're doing anything supplemental or filling out any forms that support disability. They might say, well, if my own patient told me to do it, I'm not going to go against my patient, but that may not be the way things actually are. So let's get an independent doctor in here to kind of see things. And for those of you watching, if you've had any experience with anything in the personal injury or workers' comp fields, you'll come to know that this type of scenario is actually very common there as well. It's very similar to this. In those instances, it's an exam known as an IME, an independent medical exam, although ironically, there's nothing independent about it typically, and there's questionably nothing medically about it too. The doctors or providers that examine people in those situations are not independent in that regard. They are doctors you may never seen before, but they tend to be very one-sided in favor of the insurance carrier that's sending you to it. And in a lot of ways, it's a similar concept here that the doctors Social Security send you to, which are a lot of the same ones over and over again, are really kind of on Social Security side. It's despite claiming that they're neutral and impartial. So it's important to be aware of both of those reasons to understand and be well prepared for them, which is the main point of this video and what I'm getting to. All right, let's get to we've done the what and the why. Now we're at the who. Consultative examinations, who does them? So CEs are performed by licensed medical providers and these are people with regular practices. These aren't just people that work for Social Security, and that's all they do. They do these appointments regularly. They do get compensated for them. I don't even want to get into a discussion of likely how much they make just doing this. They probably could end their existing practices and just live off of this and be doing just fine. But another story for another day. So again, they are properly licensed. Many of them are even board certified in whatever field they're in. And again, they do have regular practices where they see patients for treatment, but that's not what you see them for. Now, in some ways, CEs are like regular doctor's appointments. You kind of go about them the same, same sequence of events. You get there, you check in at the front desk, you may fill out some forms, you get taken back with a nurse or assistant. They'll take some vitals and simple things, height and weight, blood pressure, pulse, stuff like that, temperature. And then eventually, after talking to them and giving them some background, you're going to see the doctor or provider. And I say provider because sometimes it's not an MD that you see. It might be a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant. But again, licensed and qualified, just the same. Now, the CEs are generally focused based on what your impairments are. So specifically, if you have physical health impairments, you're going to see some type of physical medicine doctor, and it could be a specialist in an area that you might need given your impairments. If you have mental health impairments, you'll see a mental health provider, which again could end up being an actual MD psychiatrist, or it could be a PhD or master's psychologist or counselor. And if you have both types of impairments, you might very well see one of each. I've seen many cases, many of my current clients, where they are actually seen by both on different dates. They might be close together, but they're different and they're independent of each other. All right, now we're at the how. How do they work? All right, so for physical CEs, again, a lot of this is very similar to a normal doctor's appointment in some respects. The doctor themselves or provider that you're seeing will ask questions generally pertaining to your impairments and your symptoms and daily activities and other relevant topics. Occasionally, they might try to go into areas that they're not supposed to. We'll talk about that as well. And then they'll usually do some type of physical exam, and that generally involves checking certain things, like your ability to sit, stand, and walk, and how long you can do each of these things, how easily you can do them. They'll move different parts of your body in different directions to check your range of motion. They'll check your strength abilities as far as grip and resistance, where they might say, squeeze my hand as hard as you can. I'm going to push down, you push up against my resistance as much as you can, and measurements like that. Some of them are quantitative, numerical measurements. Some of them are just, a little more subjective, based on the feel of something. And that's pretty much the bulk of what they do. On a rare occasion, they might even do some type of diagnostic imaging, like an X-ray. But yeah, that's pretty much how that goes. After the exam, the doctor will write a report and likely complete a medical source statement or an RFC, residual functional capacity form, of your physical abilities and limitations, and that will all get submitted to Social Security. You won't automatically get a copy, nor will your treating doctor, but you can request one to be sent to your treating doctor. There's a release form you can sign. And if you have an attorney, your attorney can access this report and form online as soon as it's posted. And that usually happens, I might mention this in a future slide, but this usually happens within at least a couple weeks, sometimes more, and occasionally quicker than that. So that's the time frame. They usually get them out pretty quickly. So that's the physical one. Continuing here, mental CEs. So again, this time it's a doctor or a provider, and again, it might be a psychologist or licensed counselor. They will also ask questions, but this time pertaining to your mental impairments, symptoms, daily activities, and other relevant topics. And then they will perform, rather than a physical exam, what's known as a mental status exam. Sometimes it's known as a mini mental status exam, or MMSE. They're basically doing it to test various memory and cognitive abilities, your ability to focus and concentrate on tasks at hand. Sometimes they'll do formal IQ testing if you have the type of impairment that might suggest you have below average IQ or learning abilities. Some examples of things they do, just to give you a few, and I have them listed here, but I'm going to explain them. So serial sevens is where they generally tell you to start at 100 and count backwards from 7. In some ways, it feels more like it's a sobriety test than a medical exam. Short-term recall of 3 words. So they'll tell you 3 words, whatever the 3 words are, and it's never the same thing. So it's not like you can memorize them ahead of time. And then they'll do other things, talk to you for a few minutes, and then eventually come back and say, can you repeat those same 3 words back to me to see how you do? They might ask you about proverbs like, what does the phrase, no use crying over spilled milk mean to you? Or people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, that kind of thing. And they'll see how you use deductive reasoning to figure out the abstract meaning behind that. They might ask you about situational scenarios. Like, for example, what would you do if you were walking down the street and you saw a sealed envelope that was stamped on the side of the road, and see if you'd say you'd pick it up and mail it versus picking it up and throwing it in the air like a paper airplane. Or they might look to see, you know, what you would do if you were in a crowded room and someone yelled out fire, kind of thing. So there's other examples too, but that should give you a general sense of, you know, at least some of the things you're asked to do in a mental status exam. Now, just like with the physical one, the provider will complete a written report and a mental health medical source statement in RFC form. And I'll show you a little bit of an example of each of those in a later slide. And again, this one will address mental health related and functional limitations, like the ability to understand and follow simple or complex instructions and tasks, respond to changes in the workplace, consistently attend work, work with and around other people and interact with them, and so on and so forth. But when does the report and the MSS and RFC form come, and why does it matter? Another why question. So again, I think I mentioned this a little prematurely. The average waiting time it's usually at least 2 weeks. It can be longer and it can be sooner again. And again, if you have an attorney, they can access it online. So that's about a good time to start checking for it. Now, coming back to a prior slide, and what I had said about the fact that there's an unofficial reason why these are done. And again, these are not for the purpose of treatment, but also the fact that many of the same doctors are used by Social Security over and over again. It's no surprise to learn that far more often than not, the report that they generate and the MSS RFC forms will not be supportive of complete disability, and will also likely, in many respects, try to minimize what's wrong with you, assuming they find anything at all, because there have been CEs where they'll actually come out and say they can't find any severe impairments, which is step 2 of the process. Now, one thing I will also say before I go any further, and it's not on any of my slides, that's why I know I'm going to say it now. The judges and or decision makers that review these reports are in no way bound by what they say. That doesn't mean they're not going to consider them at all. And in many instances, they'll consider them pretty significantly. But if there's really no support for what they're saying, and if their findings and opinions are way out in left field, which has been known to happen, then obviously you don't really have to be that concerned about it. But the purpose and the goal here is to put it in a position where they can't really say that, when they can't really make some ridiculous findings and opinions that can't be supported. And in many ways, this is to prepare you to not give them an inch so they don't take a mile, and then some. So you know, that's largely what this is about. And I will also mention too, again, I don't think this is on any of my slides, but there actually have been, and there may even currently be going on, I haven't checked recently, in different parts of the country, certain class action suits going on with regards to Social Security, some I think directly against Social Security, for using certain providers whose reports and findings are not only out in left field, but are clearly in some way, I don't want to go using the word fraudulent, but clearly contain false or inaccurate information, because they copy and paste so many of the same over and over again for so many people they see, and just doesn't match up. And I will talk about that. I know that's covered in a upcoming slide, but just to be aware of it. To comment a little more, the RFC forms will also likely indicate that you have greater abilities than you claim. Physically, your RFC will often be at least 1 level more than it should be. So if you're pretty much hovering in the sedentary area of sitting and sitting 6 hours, standing and walking no more than 2 hours of an 8-hour day, and lifting and carrying no more than 10 pounds, they'll usually figure out a way to say, oh, well, we're going to bump it up to light, which is lifting up to 20 pounds, standing and walking up to 6 hours of an 8-hour day. Mentally, your RFC will often say you can at least do simple tasks and instructions and at least occasionally be around others. And again, you'll understand why that's all kind of relevant eventually. The way I always liken it, well, first of all, with regards to the physical RFC, so if you are in one of those age categories I've mentioned before, and I will be doing a future video to go into this in more detail, but those special rules that come into play, the grid rules, as we call them, or the medical vocational rules, if you're in an age category that requires that you be found in an RFC level, certain RFC level, to award you disability automatically or find you disabled, this is where a lot of times these exams come in to give Social Security the support to say, oh, you almost got there, but you came just short, and it's enough for us to deny your claim validly, although that's questionable too. So if you need to have a sedentary RFC to be found disabled, this will find you light, even though it might be some additional limitations, it'll still find you light. If you need a light RFC to find you disabled, they'll find a way to bump you up to medium right after that. And I always liken that scenario to, if any of you are familiar with those scratch-off lottery tickets that you get, where you, let's say it's one of the ones where you have to match 3 amounts. So you'll match 2 and you'll get really, really close on the third. You might even, like if you've got 2 that's a $500 and then you're starting to scratch the next one, and you see a 5 and you get nervously excited thinking, oh, I'm almost there. And then you see a 0 and then you're like, oh, one more 0. And then suddenly you see no zeros after that. So 500, 550. Well, I always kind of liken this to that because that's kind of what they do as well. Like they'll always get you just close enough, but not quite there. So we're going to try to put it in a way that that's not going to happen as often, or at least we're going to better our chances of that not happening. So, talking a little bit more about the MSS and RFC form. And I know it's a little smushed on the screen, and I don't think there's any way I can zoom in on it more than it is since it's in the slideshow format. But this is the forms that Social Security still uses. And if the doctor's choosing to use this rather than just writing it out themselves, this is kind of what you can see. Now, this is just page 1 of each one, but you'll see the one on the left is for mental and the one on the right is for physical. Now, starting on the left one, you'll notice that the categories of specific functions and limitations, and if you can't read, because it is a little bit, like I said, small print since I can't zoom, I'll tell you what it says, and I'll try to use my mouse here to point it out to you. So you have these 5 columns here with check boxes. The first column is none. The second column is mild, then moderate, marked, and extreme. So as I'm sure you can guess, the more likely you have limitations in the right 2 columns, or marked or extreme, the more likely you can be found disabled as long as they accept the report. And they even have definitions for how each of those limitations is determined. For marked, basically they say you are seriously limited in functioning in this area independently, appropriately, and effectively. For extreme, you can't do it at all. And then moderate is you have a fair ability to function independently and appropriately and on a sustained basis. So more often than not, when you see these forms, you're living in the mild or moderate columns, sometimes even in the none columns. But just in this first category on this first page here, and these forms are available online, so you can always look these up and try to see what they say in full. But you can see the examples here. Understand and remember simple instructions, carry out simple instructions, the ability to make judgments on simple work-related decisions, understand and remember complex instructions, carry out complex instructions, the ability to make judgments on complex and work-related decisions. And then it says identify the factors that support your assessment. So they have to list out how they're coming up with this. They can't just check the boxes willy-nilly and say, okay, that's what it is. And if you're going to see marked or extreme, you're more likely to see it when you start getting into complex, because basically all that says is you can't do super skilled work that requires not only a high intelligence level, but certain specific skills and experience to be able to do it, highly technical type of work, or just, professional experience type stuff. You have to have a pretty significant impairment with limitations to be found marked in even just simple instructions. But again, that's usually where we're living. Turning to the physical one rather, instead of the terms mild, moderate, and marked and extreme like they have there, we have terms that usually come up in terms of both. So in this first page example, you'll see in the left columns here, lifting and carrying in different weight levels. And basically we have never, and we have occasionally, frequently, and continuously. And regular and continuous basis means 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, like you'd find on a typical full-time job. Occasionally is defined as 1/3 of that time. So that's about 2.5 hours, give or take. Frequently means 1/3 to 2/3 of the time. So that's anywhere from 2.5 to like 5.5. And then continuously means more than 2/3 of the time. So that's just about the entire day. So in this first page example, again, they want to know how often during the 8-hour day you can lift and carry up to 10 pounds, never, occasionally, frequently, continuously. And then 11 to 20, 21 to 50, and 51 to 100. So if you've got a physical impairment, you're usually going to see never for the really heavy ones, although sometimes you might even see occasional for at least 21 to 50 pounds. And then you'll usually see at least occasional for 11 to 20, and then frequently or continuously for up to 10. Again, there's more pages to this form than the mental one. The next page goes into the limitations on sitting, standing, and walking, both how much you can do at one time before you have to stop, and how much total you can do in an 8-hour day, and things of that nature. So again, definitely advise looking at these forms at your leisure. If you just pull them up online, you can see what they entail. And your own doctors can use these same forms too. If you have an attorney, your attorney will probably have their own version of this form. I know I do for both, and they're much more comprehensive and detailed than these are, but that's what Social Security uses. All right, now, the where question. Where can you improve your chances, and how can you best prepare? Sorry, I had to bring in another how. All right, so this is where basically what I'm about to tell you is what I go over with my own clients once they understand what a CE is and how it works, the same as I just explained. So basically from this point on, kind of pretend like you are my client and I'm preparing you for this before you go in, because unfortunately, as much as I'd like to, aside from the fact that time in my schedule wouldn't permit it, I'm really not allowed to do this anyway, and it wouldn't be proper for me to. I'm not allowed to attend these appointments with my clients, so I have to kind of give them the voice and the knowledge as if I was, so that they know how to handle themselves and be best prepared. So, starting right out of the gate, if you do have an attorney, he or she should prepare you for this, and if they're not, then with all due respect, you might want to very carefully consider whether you want to stick with that attorney, because you don't want to send your clients into the lion's den without being prepared for how to defend themselves. Now, here is a list of do's and, well, I don't know why it says 2 don'ts. It probably meant to say 2 do's and 2 don'ts, but again, late at night, folks. Give me a little slack here. Cut me a little slack. All right, so this is, I don't really say it necessarily this way when I prepare my clients, but because we're doing it in this fashion and with a slideshow to go with it, I think this is the more effective way of doing it. So list of do's and don'ts for these CEs. All right, this one I'm devoting its own slide to before I get to any more, because this one's really important. This is the very first thing I tell any of my clients. Do bring someone with you to the exam and into the room. Now, most of my clients do not take themselves to these exams, and they were never planning to. So when I ask my clients, are you planning to bring someone with you? If they're married and they have a spouse, then usually it's the spouse. If they have a family member, an adult child, or parent even, or a really close friend, that's fine too. Doesn't have to be any specific person. But there's a reason why I ask them that, because as long as they have someone available, there are rare occasions where I have a client that just doesn't have anybody and there's nothing we can do, and that's fine. I don't want anybody to go out of their way and cause extra problems for themselves. So, but for the most part, you usually have someone available and you're planning to bring them anyway. But it's more than just having them drive you or take you to the exam. It's that they need to actually come into the room with you. Now, why is that? Well, there's a few reasons, and there's a few things to explain to the provider's office when you do this. First of all, be aware of this, and this is very crucial, because I've seen some people I've seen some providers running afoul of this, and some clients of mine being victimized essentially as a result. No provider can prohibit anyone by any law or rule, and if they try to, you can and should respectfully refuse to participate until they do. There are providers that, whether they go on power trips or whether they think this is the law and that's what they're allowed to do, that try to bully my clients when they get to these appointments to say, no, your spouse or whoever you brought with you is not allowed to come back. That is absolute baloney. And they try to tell you otherwise. They're going to be just completely off their rockers, because I don't know where they come up with this. There is absolutely zero basis or authority for that. And it's no different than when you accompany a family member or spouse to any kind of doctor's appointment. If you want to bring them back to the exam room, they're coming back to the exam room with you. It's simple as that. And it's not just for little kids with their parents bringing them back. No, 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 no. You are absolutely allowed to bring whoever you want in with you. Now, the primary reason why I think certain providers don't want people coming back is because they don't want anybody to see what's actually happening behind the scenes. And we're going to get into that in just a minute too. But obviously, that's kind of the intent behind this. Now, they are coming with you, and this is not a lie to say this, because if I tell any of my clients this, they agree. Oh, yeah, absolutely, for sure. They're coming there to help support you, and also potentially to help you communicate your medical history if you either fuzzy on what your medical history consists of, or dates, or specific details. And if they've been through it with you through thick and thin, they're going to know better than you and just help communicate that. And that is a perfectly valid reason why they should be there. And again, just to offer physical or emotional support, nothing wrong with that. So if the doctor's office actually asks you, why are you insisting you need to bring this person back? Not that they're allowed to, and not that you owe them any explanation, because you can just say, because I want them there. That's literally all you have to say, and that's good enough. But if you want to be able to give them a reason just to kind of, excuse me for saying it, shut them the hell up, then that's what you tell them. Now, here's the real reason why they need to be there with you and why I insist my clients need them. This person's going to be a second set of eyes and ears to observe exactly what happens during the CE and how much time the actual provider, not any of the provider's staff or nurses or anyone else, actually spends with you. And when it's over and you all get back in your car, assuming you drove there, what you need to be prepared to do is immediately take notes of your observations while they're still fresh in your mind, and then be prepared to provide them to your attorney to have in writing. And I'll get to more of that, like I said, in just a little bit. And again, you never want to communicate that that's really what you're doing, nor do you ever want to take those notes while you're in the presence of the provider, or even just in that office or suite to begin with. You want to wait till you're clear out of the building and back in your car. Nobody's surveilling you to see if that's what you're doing, but that's what you want to be doing and be prepared to do. Let's continue along. Do's and don'ts continue. Okay. I know I probably shouldn't have to say this, but it is important, especially if you get a provider that can be a little persistent and even try to push your buttons a little bit, especially starting with allowing somebody back that is allowed to come back. But always, no matter what, be civil and courteous with them. Even if it gets so contentious that you actually say, well, I'm going to refuse to cooperate and participate in this exam unless you let my so-and-so back with me. But you still want to do it civil and courteous. You never want to get uppity with them. You never want to be standoffish. You never want to get in their face, yell, scream, shout obscenities, and so on and so forth. Don't let your guard down. And always remember, this doctor or provider is not necessarily on your side, and his or her report will likely not be supportive of disability, especially if you give them the ammunition to do that. So what you need to be aware of is that, and this is important too, because I've seen far too many clients over the years that get lulled into a false sense of security. Many of these doctors and providers actually have a good bedside manner, and some of them even go a step further. Some of them will even get my clients to relax so much and be so at ease that they'll even go as far as telling them what ultimately will end up being a bold-faced lie, which is basically, without saying it in necessarily so many words, more or less will kind of say, oh yeah, there's no doubt in my mind you're disabled and you should be entitled to your benefits, and my report will certainly reflect and support that. And my clients get so excited. It's like, oh my God, this is the key. This is finally going to be it. I'm going to get approved. And then the rug gets completely pulled out from under them when they come to see what's actually in that report. And it has nothing to do and in no way matches what the provider told them. And that's why I tell my clients, never let your guard down. You always have to keep squarely in the back of your mind what that doctor is there to do and not do, and what you have to do and not do to advocate for yourself. Do give forth your best effort on all exam questions and tasks so they can't say you're uncooperative or not putting forth full effort. And they will not hesitate to write that in if they sense that's what's going on. So on the physical end of things, whatever you're being asked to do in terms of different testing and measurements, make sure you're cooperating as best you can. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well. And for the mental status exam, do what's being asked, and certainly don't try to fake not being able to do it, or just pretending like you don't understand it if you really do. And again, I'll get to that a little bit more as well. All right. This is more so for the physical side of things. Do not push yourself beyond your true capabilities and limits, especially if you could risk making yourself worse. So for example, don't reach in a certain direction further than you can. You know, if you're bending down at the waist and your back is really killing you, don't let them push you all the way down to your toes just to see that you can do it, if it's going to put you into a tailspin of pain and discomfort the rest of that day and for however long further. Don't reach your arms in different directions. If you have a shoulder or arm problem and they're asking you to see how far you can raise your arm, you get it up to shoulder level, and you know you can't go any higher than that. You try to go even just an inch further, it's like, ow, there goes my rotator cuff, there goes this or that. Squeezing your hand if you've got carpal tunnel, don't try to squeeze it so hard that, oh my God, I'm going to the roof, or I've got the huge pins and needles sensation in my hands. Don't be pushed beyond your limits. Do be your own advocate. Now, this is a really, really crucial thing. If you recall from my video on the function report, if you've hopefully watched that by the time you get to this one, you have to, in many ways, this exam is like a live version of the function report, especially when you are either answering written questions ahead of time as far as filling out forms, or if the provider is asking you questions verbally. You need to be your own advocate. And just like with the function report, you need to read between the lines and provide as much relevant information as you can of what's going on in your daily life and the limitations you have, even when you're not asked. So that way they can note them in the records, or at least they'll have, or supposedly will have, a record of it, and you'll know you told them that. It's so vital that you not leave anything off the table when it comes to talking about your limitations. And there's gonna be a specific do and don't bullet point coming up that's going to speak to that even more so. It may actually be the next one. I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, there it is. Do not be intimidated into having words or answers put into your mouth, which in many ways is what the function report again does, with the way various questions are pretty loaded. And these providers are more or less trained, so to speak, to do just that, as much as you may think they're not. They are notorious for asking these loaded questions. And here's, just a couple of examples. they're not only leading questions, but they're questions that just suggest the answer for you before you even get a chance to speak it. And they do it so casually and nonchalant in passing. It's like that's where you don't always notice it. So sometimes not even looking at you, you can dress and bathe yourself. Not even can you dress and bathe yourself, or you can dress and you're bathing yourself, can't you? And that is not a situation where you want to just simply give a yes answer, even if the technical answer is yes. You need to be prepared and advocating for yourself, just like the prior bullet point, to state what your difficulties are in doing it. Just because you can technically do it and the answer is a technical yes, doesn't mean it's without its challenges and limitations. But you have to tell the provider that, or the first thing they're going to write in their report is patient reports they can take care of their own personal care with no difficulty. They're even going to add in a phrase like with no difficulty, even if you don't say those words. But if you put out there what your difficulty is, not just that you have it, but hey, so you can dress and bathe yourself. Well, I have difficulties doing that. I can do it, but I have to have my husband or wife help me get my shirt over my head. I have to sit down to carefully put pants and socks on. I can't wear shoes that require laces. I have to do slip-in shoes for my feet, or certain kinds of comfortable or orthotic shoes. If my arm or shoulder bothers me, it's really hard. If my hands from carpal tunnel bother me, I can't button buttons or zippers easily, and so on and so forth. And you're kind of answering these questions the same way I told you to answer them in the function report. So it's the same concept. Another thing too, and this is interestingly enough, and I don't have this as a bullet point on one of my slides, but I always tell people in an IME situation, in a regular personal injury matter, where it's an actual lawsuit, usually a lot of these questions you've answered when you've done what we call discovery, if you're familiar with the lawsuit, where you're doing written questions to be answered, which is kind of like what the function report is. These doctor visits, these quote exams, in many ways are designed to try to see if they're going to catch you in a contradiction. Like, did you say one thing a certain way in the function report, and now before this doctor, you're saying something completely different? So another good rule of thumb, I don't always go out of my way to say this exactly to my clients, but another big rule of thumb is to study your function report really carefully to know what it says before, because not coincidentally, these exams, when they do get scheduled, don't get scheduled until you've turned in your function report, assuming you did turn it in. So always be aware that the doctor may or may not have seen the function report, but at the end of the day, they will be the first ones to point out any of those discrepancies or contradictions. So be aware of that. Okay, continued. Do make note of what you're asked to do and how well you do it so you can see if it matches up on the report. Now, I made some reference to this before, and I'm gonna really reiterate it now. There are doctors that are doing these CEs, and us practitioners especially are really trying to advocate for all of you on a grander scale to find when we're starting to see patterns of this, which is essentially abuse of the process. We're trying to call it out, both individually in individual cases and on a grander scale with these actual formal class action suits. Some of these providers, whether it's that they're overworked or whether they're doing it by design, because they know they're getting paid buku bucks to do these exams over and over again, and Social Security keeps coming back and using them. Not only are they regularly writing up reports and forms that are not supportive of your disability, but they're doing it in a way that there are things in your report that are entirely inaccurate or even false. So they're stating things that they're saying happened or that they did with you during the exam that you come out of it and note, no, I never did that. Or no, when they said I had no difficulty with this, I absolutely had difficulty doing this. I just recently had one where the doctor wrote that my client had no difficulty using her hand. She had a major carpal tunnel as one of her major impairments, one of several, and she had no difficulty zippering zippers or buttoning buttons and had full grip strength. And when I asked her about it, she said, oh, no. He had one of those little like kid toy things where it's like a little stuffed animal that's got a zipper and buttons on it. And asked me to button and unbutton and zip it up and down. And I had really difficult time doing that. I couldn't do it all the way. And it took me forever when I was trying to, because my hands were cramping up so much. And when he asked me to squeeze his hand, I could only go so far. And I could barely make I couldn't even make a full fist. Like, this is what I look like. Well, if the report says something completely 180 degrees different, that's what you have to be prepared to call out. And that's part of, again, the idea of why I have outside observers come to these appointments to make these notes, because these notes could become part of your record and file as a way of not only negating what's in the report to get it to be completely discarded, or even more so, the provider that authored it to be called out completely and never used again. And this is all comes back to, again, where you have to advocate for yourself, and that's why it's so huge. Don't hesitate. So coming back a little bit to what I said before, don't hesitate to point out those contradictions or discrepancies, or again, downright false statements or reports in the final report if you know them to be inaccurate. And that's where sending those observation notes to your attorney, or if you're not represented, directly to your caseworker or Social Security at the field office, is vital, especially when you're making them fresh in your mind at the time it all occurs. Again, do what you're asked. You never want to refuse to do something. Well, to clarify, you never want to refuse to just for the sake of refusing. If you're asked to do something, particularly on the physical end of things, and you know for a fact you can't do it at all, and if you try, you are going to send yourself through the roof in pain or discomfort or whatever you have, refusing to do it by saying to the doctor, I'm so sorry, I know I cannot do this. I don't even want to try because it's going to put me through the roof. When I've done it at home, that's what happens. That is completely different than saying, no, I'm not doing that, and not giving a reason. As long as you verbalize it, they can't come back later, at least not truthfully, and state that you did not cooperate or comply with what was asked because you had a legitimate reason why you couldn't, a legitimate medical reason, and you have to vocalize that. You cannot leave that in your head, because the doctor, your provider, is not going to fill it in for you. So again, don't pretend. Oh, well, this is a little bit related to that, but also don't pretend you can't do something if you really can, because if you end up being called a malingerer, which is a fancier way of saying a faker, that is far worse than getting a bad report that's not supportive. And that specific label of being a malingerer may follow you throughout the entire pendency of your claim, to the extent that it might start impacting your credibility at a later date, where judges or decision makers are going to realize you may not be that believable if you were called out as being a malingerer, saying you couldn't do something that you really could, or just not doing as well when you're clearly not putting forth effort that you can be putting forth. So always be true to yourself. Honesty really is the best policy. The bottom line, do not avoid consultative examinations. I mean, for one thing, you can't refuse to do one if they ask you to do one. If you do, they're going to make a decision based on the evidence they have, and you can pretty much guarantee it's going to be a denial, even if you've got fully supportive evidence from treating doctors. If they want to have it done, they're entitled to, and you have to comply. So do not avoid them, but at the same time, do not be afraid of them. They are not intended to be overwhelming or stressful, despite how overwhelming and stressful the whole process in general is. Sometimes the results actually are favorable, or at least supportive enough to warrant disability. And again, even in those situations, every so often, Social Security may set those results aside and disregard them. And I've seen that happen, where I've got not only treating doctors and providers that have really strong supportive medical evidence, but they see one of the independent doctors and equally supportive, and yet somehow decision makers were asleep at the wheel when they made the decision. And don't be discouraged. That gives you great grounds for appeals. It's frustrating to have to do that because it shouldn't have to be dragged out, and it's a drain on everyone's resources, including theirs. But that's the way they want to play it. Then you have to be prepared to meet them halfway and play hardball. If you do prepare fully and you do your best, no matter what kind of exam it is, you really can't go wrong. Honestly, no matter what the outcome is, you're going to do just fine. And if the report is still not supportive in spite of following all this and then some, you have avenues to explore. So again, if any of you have any questions, as I always offer, My phone and email are the best ways to contact me, and I respond directly to calls and emails directly and promptly, generally the same day, and I'll even respond to my text messages as long as I know who you are. And I hope you found this latest video very informative and very useful for whatever stage your claim may already be at, if it's already filed, or if you're filing a future claim. This will help you hit the ground running and really be prepared for what's to come. So I thank you once again for tuning in, and to my actual subscribers. I didn't realize until recently I have current subscribers to this YouTube channel, which is awesome. Wasn't my intent when I created it, but I'll take it. I want to help as many people as possible, and this is where it starts. So I will look forward to seeing you all for the next month's video. And just a little shout out, just to say that I was asked this year for the first time to speak at the National Convention for the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, NOSCAR, and different parts of all the topics of my videos I've done will be incorporated into the presentation I'm doing. So I'm really excited about that. I might have something to share from that experience in a future video if they make that material available to me. But again, I will look forward to seeing you all for the next one, and you all take care. Have a great night.